Here we are. We are live. Good afternoon. It's Friday afternoon, and we have a special guest coming to us from California. She is on the Pacific Coast, and so we're excited to have author Kathryn Inman. She has released a new book called Counting Spoons. It's a really tough story, but the story's got a really great ending, and we're going to talk about addiction, heroin, the state of drug abuse in our nation. It is just ravaging families and homes, and it is not a respecter of people. So, Kathryn, welcome. I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you so much, Beth. I'm so excited to be here. Truly an honor.
You know, it's a tough topic, and so many people don't know what to do with the topic. We know people are coming across the border with fentanyl. We know people are coming into our country with drugs, and we know that people are dying as a result of it. And, so let's talk about how you got to write this book. And I know you're a wife, a mama, a grandmother. We play all those roles, and it's nothing hurts a mama's heart more than when when their life is on the line, right? Let's talk about that. I mean, how did that feel for you?
It blindsided me, Beth. I come from a big family. I was the youngest of 5 kids, a family of 7. And, we had addiction and alcoholism in our immediate family. It's not something that was new to me. I grew up around it. I consider myself pretty savvy. And I also didn't have dreams of being a mom. I lived a pretty selfish life. I was happy doing that. And then when I had these boys, I have 2 biological sons. So my husband and I, it's a second marriage for us, and we have 5 adult children together. But when I was raising my 2 boys, as soon as they were born, I just adored them. I just love them. And your dreams change. You just want the best for them.
Right.
So all those things. And, we were close, and both my sons, I was just so proud of them, just absolutely adored and cherished them. So this thing with Justin, my youngest, it was almost like I could deal with anything except that. It is a dark, agonizing journey. It is a long one. I spent a lot of that time preparing for his death because I felt like that's where we were headed. So it's, we were a happy family. We had our share of struggles, but we were thriving and very close. And when addiction hit our family, everything changed.
Yeah. And how did you find out about it? How did you find out that, I guess they go through the teens and, they're doing and dabbling and things like that. But when was the moment when you realized, this could be a death sentence? When did you wake up and realize, oh my gosh, we're in over our head?
Yeah, it was, that first year, Justin started dabbling early. I missed a lot, and I'm still surprised by that because I was very hands-on and very involved with my children. I noticed his behaviors were changing. It's all the things you hear about, the friends were changing, relationships were changing. He was, his physical appearance changed very quickly. He was an athlete. Justin was very much into sports and, quarterback for the football team, and he was a catcher in baseball and very extroverted. And his behaviors just started changing. And I knew he was dabbling. That first year was difficult because things kept happening that I just couldn't make sense of. And I noticed a shift in him. At one point, I thought maybe he was sick. Maybe he was mentally ill. I just couldn't put my finger on it. Then I realized he was using, so I started getting drug tests and all those things that you go through as the chaos starts to set in your life. And it wasn't until after he turned 18, and I could tell instantly when he was impaired, when he was using something. And we went back and forth, and finally I just put my foot down and made him sign a release for medical care that all his information would be available to me. At first he said no, and then I let him know then he wouldn't be sleeping at home. It had come to that. And so that's when we're in the office with the doctor trying to figure out how to get him through detox. That's when she asked him, when's the last time you used heroin? And that rocked me. I don't think
you've heard of it and you're like, oh my gosh, we have gone straight past the dabbling in, smoking weed and, maybe a pill here and there to all of a sudden heroin. I mean, that's like, oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that was something I hadn't heard of for years. I did not know heroin was on the streets. And what happened is it's the opiates, and they would get addicted to that. They were too expensive, hard to get their hands on, but heroin was cheap and plentiful. So as soon as my son tried it, the next day it had a grip on him, and he became consumed by it. So it was a fast
track. They say one time. One time, and they're addicted, and that's just so scary.
It's so scary because everything I knew and loved about my son and his heart changed. I mean, he was always a gentleman. He was thoughtful, sweet, kind, all those things, and he became this person that was unrecognizable. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I want you to describe the unrecognizable, because is that physical? Is that mental? I mean, what is that? Because, some parents may think they're going through a teen phase, they're disrespectful, they're rude, they're going through the grunge phase. But what were the things that you wish you would have seen sooner?
I think there was, it's hard to describe, but I use the word shady. He was acting shady. So he was always, like I said, very extroverted, and Justin was bigger than life. So even before drugs, he was a handful. So his moods were kind of extreme anyway. He was getting in a lot of fights. So he was pretty aggressive, even though he had a very kind heart. So I knew that he was going through the phases that young men do. And so part of me was like, maybe this is just more of that. But then there was things that I just could not ignore. The physical part, Justin was always in very good shape. He always went to the gym and worked out and ate really healthy, and he was thin and his skin looked gray. He was not hanging out with the same friends, and he was, in terms of his personality, I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the trust was gone. So there was times like I would leave town for a couple of days, I'd come back, and you could almost sense the darkness, and I would think, who's been in this house? It just didn't make sense. Even holidays, like couldn't get him out of bed Christmas morning, and he had stomach aches all the time, and he was taking showers. He'd be in there for like 45 minutes. Just nothing seemed right with him. So it was, looking back that first year, it all makes sense. One thing that really hit me, Beth, was that I was taking him to the doctor trying to figure out what was going on. And he was diagnosed with ADHD, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and he was just on drugs.
So did they take that into account, that he was on drugs? I mean, obviously his personality was going to seem quite erratic if he's on all these drugs. Mm-hmm. So when he's getting diagnosed with these things, did they have the proper information to diagnose him with those? Because I'm thinking, he's probably all those things when he's all hyped up and, on heroin or whatever else. That's just pretty... Mm-hmm. Then that's a lot of other things. I mean, all of a sudden you're piled on with all kinds of stuff that you're trying to figure out how to deal with, right?
Absolutely. And no, I don't feel like it was handled appropriately in our case. I think a lot of times, healthcare is great, and you've got to advocate for people and figure out what's going on. And oftentimes there is a dual diagnosis, but that wasn't the case for Justin. And they never drug tested him. And I didn't think of having him drug tested, but as I look back on that, we could have gone down that road. I chose not to. I didn't believe it. I had just a gut feeling, and you're a kid. I could tell there was something, and I knew it was drugs. I just did not know how bad it was, how quickly everything just fell apart for us.
Well, let's talk about you as a mother. I see 7 detoxes, 6 rehabs. And those are grueling months. Those are grueling weeks. Those are just, I mean, talk about being empty as a person trying to get him to those things and save his life. How are you keeping yourself up? Because moms don't know what to do. Dads don't know what to do. Siblings don't know what to do. How are you holding yourself together?
I You have to understand, I would have said I believed in God, but I was not walking with Jesus through this. It was in our brokenness that we found Christ. So uh, I I wasn't taking my care of myself. Looking back on how I was just in this survival mode, and I have always had a thing for control, Beth, and
Yeah.
I believed that I could control my kid.
Yeah.
I felt like I could make demands on him and have boundaries and exercise tough love and get him where he needed to be. But and honestly, it almost killed me because I was a single mom. I still worked every day. I kept the
Yeah.
house clean. I showed up in places. I smiled, but inside I was absolutely shattered.
What about his dad? Did his dad play a role in any of this? I mean, as
So
far as
yeah,
support, as part as being supportive to you or to him?
his father and I divorced when Justin was just 3 years old.
Yeah.
No disrespect to his father at all, but he and I did not get along. It was
Yeah.
hard for everybody. So he was not a support for me. We didn't really speak. And he tried with Justin. I know that there were times that he was out looking for him and doing the best he could as well. But no, we were not joined
Yeah.
in
I
that.
got you.
And part of that, I have a lot of support and I have loved ones that were willing, but Beth, I couldn't even say the words out loud.
I'm
I
sure.
held it all inside. The shame that comes with it is absolutely suffocating. So
Yeah.
I've learned a lot in terms of, since the book has come out and I've talked to a lot of parents and, I
Well,
think a lot of things right, but there's a lot of things I would have done different for sure.
and one of the messages of your book is that in order to get through things, we have to expose the wreckage. I mean, everybody has wreckage, but we all think we've got to hide it. We all think that we've got to put on the pretense and all of that. And there are times when we feel so alone and isolated because we feel alone. We feel like nobody else is going through this. How are they going to understand how I'm feeling? So I'm just not going to tell anybody. So
Right.
how do you help other parents now that you have exposed your wreckage and y'all have come through this and thank God your son is fine? um what do you tell parents now to how do you tell them to go about dealing with this now that you're through it and you can help others? You can't teach what you haven't walked, but what you have walked you can certainly walk other people through. So what's your best advice to help other moms or dads with something like this?
Yeah, uh, the first thing that you need to do is tend to yourself. You have to protect your peace. You have to make sure your basic needs are met. I mean, I wasn't eating really, I wasn't really sleeping. I was a mess. But if you want to help your loved one, the best way to do that is to take care of yourself. I believe in the power of prayer, to put the armor of Jesus on every single day because spiritual warfare is alive and it is real. And at
Yeah.
the time when I was in it, I didn't quite recognize it. I do now. The Lord has
Hmm.
exposed a lot of things to me through this and really has worked on my heart. But you have to take care of yourself. One of the things that I think is really important to say is that what works for one family may not work for another family.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But fear is crippling. The living in a constant state of fear, like with the what ifs, you can go down that rabbit hole. What if he dies? What if I kick him out and he never comes back? What if he steals from my family? What if we go to this holiday and he goes in their garage and breaks in or so? I mean, there's all these things that will absolutely take you down. And so I think it's really, really important to honestly to love like Jesus. to love in a way that's based on truth,
Yeah.
that is just, that you don't cover sin. Secrets will just destroy you.
Yeah,
And
they do. I mean,
they
and so many
do.
people feel, I feel like if anybody really knew me, they wouldn't love me. But go back to love, because, we hear a lot about tough love when it comes
Mhm.
to addicts. And, they say if you baby an addict, you're going to bury an addict. And what are your thoughts to that? I mean, how do you tough love, but also love? Because, I mean, it's impossible when you've been to detoxes all these times and you've been to rehabs all these times. At some
Yeah.
point, you're like, okay, I've done all I can do. Where's that fine line?
Yeah. I believe in tough love. I mean, it was instinctive for me. So once I knew what we were dealing with, my tolerance became very short, and I had kicked Justin out, and not so he didn't come back to the house in between all those rehabs. He did when he'd been clean for just over a year, and Justin got good at rehabs. Um, but I do believe, in my head when I kicked him out, I felt like it was the best thing for him, but also for me. And to this day, Justin thanks me for that. I mean, he said he felt like if he had a place to stay and food and a shower, that this could have gone, instead of for 7 years, it could have been for 20. So he thanks me for that. But I know people in my same position that kicked their child out and they overdosed the next day and died.
Yeah,
But that can
that's
happen
just
in your home too. You know what I mean?
right.
It's like I think we get caught up in our own power and belief that our decisions and our choices can save our people that we love, and we're not that powerful. But
That's
Christ
right.
is.
Right.
So, and that's why community is so important. When I did finally start talking to warrior sisters that I just love, and our kids were all in drugs at one point or another. But when we started to talk about um, all those things that happened that I had buried so deeply, boy, that it took the power away.
It
And
does.
I started to get peace, and the burden was lifted, and I began to spend a lot more time, instead of worrying and sleepless nights. I spent that time on my knees in prayer, and that is where the power is. I mean, we can't save our loved ones. We want to show up for them. When Justin was ready, he was very clear that he was not welcome in our home. When he was using, I would not let him be in our world.
I
But
mean, you
when he
have
was
other
ready,
people in your home, and
yeah,
you have to protect them as well. I mean, yeah,
absolutely. And I could not tolerate. It wasn't even so much like, I think this is what's best for you. I could not stand the chaos. I just
yeah.
couldn't. I couldn't deal with it. It was way too much. And I think that's a warning too, is that when you're in that level of addiction, like my son was, they'll take you down with them.
Yeah.
And Justin, there was never a question of the love we shared. Justin and I were always close. We still are, but that was not the person I was dealing with.
Yeah.
So you think people, if they love you enough, they'll stop using drugs. It doesn't work that way.
No, it's a
Mm,
demon. I mean, when you look at it,
absolutely.
it is inviting in demonic oppression and
Yep.
spirits, so that and it's you have to. So let's talk about when things began to change, because you're on the other side of this. You've got a great relationship. He
Hmm.
is doing great. Thank
Yeah.
God for that. And so, how did that? I mean, what was the change that began to bring in the change?
Yeah. Well, for me, the change was just a total desperation. There was a night that he had called me to bail him out of jail, and he had never asked me to do that before, but he was getting threats. And it was just that night that I absolutely broke, and in desperation cried out to the Lord, and he showed up, and everything changed for me. But Justin was still out there.
Yeah.
Justin
And by
had a,
showed up, what did he do? I mean, how did he show up for you?
he, I began to experience, I felt like I was maybe at the end of myself. I didn't, not that I was suicidal or anything, but I just felt like I couldn't take anymore. I hadn't even talked about it to anybody close with me, even how bad it was. Justin was on the street. He was a criminal. I could not even
Yeah.
get my head around it. So the way he showed up is I cried out desperately, and then I just felt a little bit of peace. And that began, I started eating more. There were small things, like I still couldn't sleep very good, but the nightmares went away. And I just started talking to God, like throughout my day. And things started to shift, not for Justin, but they started to shift for me. And I feel like I've said this a few times, that Christ got me to take my eyes off my son long enough to see him. And that's when I realized, like, that Christ loves Justin even more than I do. And Justin doesn't need me. I can't save him. Justin needs Christ. So that began to be my mission, not to run out and try to find him on the streets and talk him into none of that. It was just in prayer.
Yeah.
Not too long after that, Justin had the same kind of thing happen to him. He was in front of a Safeway in the Bay Area, and he was out of drugs. He had sores all over his body. He didn't even have the strength to hustle or steal, and he cried out. He said, God, take my life or give me one worth living.
Wow.
Yeah. And from there, the doors just started swinging open. And I got to him, he got in detox. And fast forward, we finally get him on a plane to a discipleship program in Washington State. And even there, Beth, he was off drugs, and he had a good 9 months clean, and he was in scripture, but he was still prideful. And it wasn't until he almost got kicked out that he humbled himself, went before the board, and pleaded with them to let him stay. And it was only then that God completely was able to transform Justin's heart. So he learned about humility. He was, Justin needed to get off drugs for sure, or he was going to die. But more than that, he is now a man of God. So Justin's heart has changed. He is super humble. He's very patient. He is not aggressive. All those things. So
he's a new man.
He's a new man in Christ. Absolutely. And everything about me has changed. It's not as obvious because I wasn't a criminal on the street, but people that know me well are like, wow, what happened to Kathryn? So
well, I think it's interesting because it's really hard to accept that you can't change another person. And then you back up and you're like, okay, well, maybe I can influence them, or maybe I can talk them into something, or maybe I could do this, or, take this or that, and so it really wasn't you ever changing him. It was you changing you that started the change process, correct?
Correct.
And I think that's powerful.
Yeah, it is, because I was to the point that even though I had set the boundaries and people would have said that I used tough love and stuck to it, but it was just destroying me. So it was like this inner hell I was going through, and I just didn't physically, mentally know if I could keep it up. So once
you had to save you.
I did. That's exactly right.
You had to save you. Yeah.
Yeah. And Christ
and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with realizing that not only do you have to save you, but you have to save the other people in your house. I mean, we've been through this in our family, and we've had a lot of this, and I get it. You have to take care of yourself, and you had to save you. And I think moms and dads need to know that, we have to do that.
We have to. It's if I was walking with Jesus at the time, I know the suffering would have still been there, of course. But I would have seen it sooner, just in terms of, if you let yourself get depleted and you let that darkness just saturate your home, it'll destroy you. I have a friend who is struggled with their child for years and years, and when this journey started, her husband and her sat down and they made a commitment that they would not let their child's drug abuse steal their joy. They committed to, we're going to still go to church, we're going to do things with friends, we're not going to cover this up. And their suffering is great, but that like commitment to continue living
Mhm.
is so important for us as individuals, and also to lead by example for
Mhm.
your one that's addicted, to be able to stand on truth. And I talked a little bit about letting them through that. It's, you know, shame is just a horrible thing. And
Yeah.
most people in addiction are very much aware of all the bad things they've done.
Well,
So,
and you have to, apart from the addicted, you have to refuse the temptation to become consumed with it, because that's where you can't see past anything else. And it sounds like your friends are great examples of someone who they realize we got a big problem here,
yeah,
but we got a life to live at the same time. And I think that's a great example of a good, I mean, it's something you have to decide hard things. You have to just choose to do the hard things. And those are never easy, but that'll
yeah,
save the rest of your family, right?
absolutely. And then when your person, by the grace of God, is ready to get help, then you're equipped for it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not tending to yourself and you're depleted, you can't help anyone. So I remember going to, when I had a really rough day and I ended up just going to a random church and talking to someone. And the first thing they asked is, "How are you doing?" And at that point, Beth, I was taken aback. I was like, "I'm fine. I'm here to talk
Yeah.
about my son." But I wasn't fine. You know,
Hmm.
that person I was talking to could see it, could see my
Yeah.
own suffering. But yeah,
Well, and part of what you said is expose the wreckage. You had your own wreckage. Your son had his wreckage. You had yours, which infiltrates the rest of the family, the marriage, the other kids. And I know you have a blended family now, but it's it's tough stuff. It
it's
just
so
really
hard.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so hard. And you know, for me, I just kind of went into survival mode. So there's things I had to do. I had to go to work and I had to take care of the house, you know, all those things, but I wasn't tending to myself. And until I had the love of Christ like shine through my heart, it felt so hopeless. But you know, I just, when you've seen miracles like I've seen, I mean, when God started opening the doors, it was just unbelievable. And so it's that hope, that living hope that now is in my heart is, whatever comes, doesn't mean there won't be suffering, but I am much more equipped
Yeah.
walking with Jesus to face whatever comes.
And we could talk all day about this, and I could ask you more questions about things you did, but the whole point of this is you have a book and it's called Counting Spoons.
Hmm.
You have it with you, you can hold it up.
I do. I always keep it
I
close.
mean,
I
what
don't
a
know why.
neat title. I think it's a very neat title. It's very obvious what it's about. And I think
Yeah.
that if people are struggling with this and want to equip themselves with your story of victory,
Hmm.
then they can get the book. You've got your website, which is kathryninman.com, right? And it's also Amazon and other places, Barnes and Noble. Your book is everywhere.
Yeah. The website is KathrynM.com.
May, Kathryn Mae.
May. Yes.
Yeah, I love it.
Hmm.
So people can get your book and they can get your whole story, and then through that they could reach out to you should they need some additional resources or anything like that, for as far as lessons or anything that you've learned. So we'll make sure that we've
Absolutely.
got that link in the post. And congratulations, you made it through. Congratulations, you've lived to tell the story. And
Mm,
I say we change the world one story at a time. And
right.
somebody, if people just share their stories, then we can help other people with their stories. And that's what you're doing with a real tough topic. So I'm
Mm.
thankful that you're doing it and that you're doing it so well.
Oh, thank you so much, Beth. I appreciate it. I always say that Justin and I met at the cross, that God
Yeah.
used our pain to bring us closer to Him and help us recognize the need for a Savior. And anybody that's going through it, you just, no one is too far gone. I
No,
mean,
no one.
I,
That's right.
nobody
No one
is,
is too far
nobody
gone. That's
is.
right.
And yeah,
That's right.
so.
And
Yeah.
everybody's worth trying to save. And
Oh my goodness, absolutely.
yeah.
I do want to add, there is on my website, there is an email for prayer or connection, and anybody that wants to reach out and if I can pray for people or support them. And Justin too, we want to be available to people.
That's awesome. That's really good. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you so much for writing your book. Thank you so much for being available to people. And one day we'll have to get you and Justin together to talk, because that would be a fun thing too, just to hear his perspective on. Yeah, we'll come back and do that. So
I would love that. He would too. He's just a joy. He's a great speaker and has a passion for that. So I know he would be honored to do that.
Yeah. Okay, well we'll plan that. All right. Well, listen, thank you so much. It's been great, and we'll definitely keep in touch.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Have a great weekend, everyone.